Pro- Profiles of Provocateurs. Recent case studies, warning signs, practical advice by Christian Williams. The story is long, convoluted, and more than a little absurd. It's all rather like the plot of a Coen's Brother movie. But the short version is that an undercover Seattle cop infiltrated an hour and after hours party scene, what prosecutors called, quote, underground illegal gambling enterprises, concurrent with illegal liquor sales, end quote. All quotes in this section are from the Stranger article. The SPD hoped to find some sort of dirt on local politicians. The FBI hoped to find a connection to the Earth Liberal Front, and after 2 years, they finally managed to hook someone with a drug scam. Quote, Brian Owens had been pushing Rick Wilson and everyone in their social set for years to help him buy even larger amounts of cocaine. He tried to play on people's greed. In quote, he's like, in quote, I can I can make you a millionaire. Rick remembers, quote, he said he would pay for the drugs and I would take no financial risk. I told him to go fuck himself. He kept pestering me. I did, to my eternal shame. Help me out, end quote. Rick says, quote,
Help him out.
to help to help him out. Great, what am I misgendering this asshole? Rick says, quote, I asked around to some people who asked around to some people who eventually gave him some, end quote. Owen then asked Wilson to come along when the exchange happened, just in case things went bad. On the way, a SWAT team surrounded Wilson's car and arrested him. It turns out Brian Owens, purported trust fund kid and environmental activist, is really Brian Van Brunt, Seattle police detective. When Wilson was interrogated, the cops were particularly interested in asking about the ELF, or ELF. They told him, quote, we have hundreds of hours of surveillance wire video, end quote. The stranger adds, quote, SPD surveillance logs showed that police were following the families of suspects, their sisters and mothers, and that some family members' homes were raided and turned upside down for evidence, end quote. Wilson was convicted of the drug crime and also of an unrelated offense he'd committed years earlier, running guns to, Chiapas for the EZLN. He was sentenced to 40 months. A handful of other party regulars were charged with, quote, professional gambling in the first degree, end quote. The usual criticisms that these sorts of operations waste money only stop crimes. The usual criticisms that these sorts of operations waste money only stop crimes that the cops themselves create and threaten our freedom have already been elsewhere. So I want to turn to, instead of the question of how activists might avoid this sort of infiltration and entrapment. After all, it makes no difference whether you take technical precautions like encrypting your email if it is your co-conspirator who's collecting the evidence against you. With this in mind, I will sum up 3 recent cases involving the use of provocateurs against the anarchist and radical environmentalist movements, and I'll point some of the warning signs that should have made people weary.
Provocateur Profile 1. Quote unquote Brian Owens. Brian Van Brunt. Looking at the Seattle story from the outside and with the benefit of hindsight, one of the things that most stands out is the number of, if you'll pardon the phrase, red flags that should have signaled that something was awry. For example, 1. Money issues. Brian's habit of throwing around cash meant that even though a lot of people didn't like him and were annoyed by his quote-unquote blustery bro dude personality, they were willing to put up with it. He bought drinks, he took people out to dinner, he helped people out with their rent, and it sounds like Brian paid for everything concerning the party space. Quote, rent, paint, locks, lumber, drywall, new plumbing, it all came out of Brian's pocket, unquote. At the same time, he was, quote, insisting that it turn a profit when everyone in the group had been taking losses for the parties, unquote. Brian also covered the expenses, including plane tickets for a pair of activists going to St. Paul to demonstrate against the 2008 Republican National Convention.
Okay, like, look, but for real though, holy shit, he was just so what he's doing is he's just funding. He's trying to fund the revolution to pull more people in so he could fucking arrest them.
Yeah. Yep. 2. Legal questions. Brian had made plans to go to the RNC himself, but was escorted off the plane by the authorities. The reason wasn't clear. He never really explained, and nothing more seemed to come of the episode. No arrest, no charges. Of course, it turned out he staged the incident himself to add to his reputation. 3. Bluster. Quote, several people remember Brian bragging that he had a record and had been arrested for political action, unquote. Though again, the details were lacking. 4. Questions about his personal life. One friend recalls, quote, when I went to the bathroom in his apartment, there was nothing in there. You'd expect some soap or towels or something. I started asking how long he'd been living there, and he got all aggravated.
Especially since he's funding everything else. Why was his apartment empty?
Yeah, I mean, like if you don't have soap, towels, but you can pay for everybody's drinks. Yeah.
Drinks, plane tickets, parties, paint, and the whole shit. Why does your place not have hand towels?
Yeah, that would be very concerning. 5. Responding to normal inquiries with hostility. See number 4. He got all aggravated. 6. Pressuring others towards illegal action. Brian kept pushing Brady McGarry towards more radical, in quote, real militant action, out quote. Asked Brady to teach him how to make Molotov cocktails and hinted that he wanted to, in quote, make explosives, out quote, and do some, in quote, property damage, out quote, at Weinhauser or at CEOs' houses, Brady remembers. He wanted to talk about the Earth Liberation Front. Brady remembers telling Brian to take it easy, in quote, it weirded me out quote, Brady says, end quote. Similarly, quote, Mia Brown remembers Brian as a guy who, in quote, always ranted about how he hated cops, out quote, and who tried to talk an enlisted friend of hers into stealing weapons from Fort Lewis, out quote. 7. Warning from others. Several of Rick Wilson's friends told him something was wrong, including one person who reported being followed, but Wilson just blew them off. Of course, none of these, on their own or even taken together, would prove that a person was a government agent, and in one way, this case is unusual in that the infiltrator actually was an undercover cop, not an amateur recruiting for the purpose. A person could easily exhibit some of these traits and behaviors and not be in the employ of the police agencies. And, naturally, it's only human to assume the best of your friends and write off uncomfortable details as harmless eccentricities or minor flaws. But several of these behaviors, characteristics, and inconsistencies would be a good reason to hold off on engaging in political work, crime, or other high-risk activities with the person involved. At the very least, it might make it seem like a good idea to check up on their background. Of course, Rick Wilson is not the only person to pay the price for failing to take such precautions.
Provocateur profile number 2. Anna. Eric McDavid fell prey to a paid FBI informant operating under the name Anna. Anna entered the anarchist scene during the 2003 anti-FTAA protests. When at the age of 17, she infiltrated anarchist spokes council meeting as part of a class project. A fellow classmate, a police officer, was impressed with her work and arranged a meeting with the FBI.
As prosecutors in McDavid's case explained, quote, over the next year or so, she attended various functions where illegal protests are expected. The Republican National Convention, the Democratic National Convention, and the GA Summit. Ultimately, she helped to put together and then break up a conspiracy to attack the, quote, Institute of Forest Genetics, cell phone towers, Nimbus Dam, and possibly the fish hatchery nearby, end quote. Zachary Jensen's testimony. Anna met Eric McDavid at a crime think meeting in 2004, ironically at a workshop on identifying undercover agents. She later testified, quote, at the time I thought he was inconsequential. I thought he was a college student and not of interest to the FBI, end quote. But he formed a romantic attachment to her, and she later used that emotional connection to join a quote, in quote unquote cell involving McDavid and two others, Zachary Jensen and Lauren Weiner. Over the next several months, Anna moved increasingly into the leadership of the group. She organized meetings, kept notes, covered expenses, pressed the others onward when they had doubts, and urged them to solidify their plans. As the Sacramento News and Review put it, quote, documents from the investigation reviewed by SN&R suggest that Anna provided much of the financial support, the encouragement, and the know-how needed to turn their talk into action. They also showed that whenever the group started to lose focus or to have second thoughts, Anna badgered them about being all talk and not sticking to action and to the action plan, end quote. What a fucking bitch.
Right? Like, no one wants to do this thing that's going to get them in trouble. No, you got to. Oh, you did it. Like, come on.
Yeah, just gotta make herself fucking important to the FBI. She's gotta feel that this is power. This is you know, oh, I can get fucking people in trouble and I could just be a dick about it. Anna was crucial to forming and sustaining the plot, pushing the others to get more serious, move faster, and make real plans. It was Anna, facilitated by the FBI, who provided the instructions and materials for making a bomb. No actual bomb was produced. Diane Bennett, one of the jurors from the case, described Anna's role, quote, providing all of the essential tools for the group. The cabin, the money, the idea, the books, everything, end quote. It was Anna who provided the bomb recipe, it was the materials, and was insistent on moving ahead with the plan, even when others were unmotivated or expressed reservations. As Lauren Wieners testified, quote, Anna was most concerned about keeping on schedule. She wanted to speed things up, end quote. Or, as the prosecutor put it, quote, they discussed maybe slowing up this conspiracy, maybe going slower so they don't have these mistakes. Anna is pushing to get more organized, end quote. I mean, get more organized. Like, it was moving them faster so, like, there would be less organization. Yeah. I mean, like, that's how you make things fall apart anyway, right? You speed things up so that, like, oh, you know, we're past deadline. Oh shit, but we rushed, so we forgot this, and that.
Yeah, and you got to cut corners, and then someone forgets something, ill-prepared.
Now let that be a light. Look, I'm gonna go to the discussion panel real quick. Look, let this be a life lesson. Do not rush. Make sure you take your time so you don't forget anything. When you leave the house, make sure you have your keys, your pepper gel, you know, all the things, you got your rag and all that, because if you go out and you rush, you might forget one of these things. You might not be able to get back into your house, you might not be able to defend yourself, and you might not be able to show, you know, what you represent. So make sure you don't rush. Don't rush. We don't need to rush. Make sure everything is planned out well, and you check check. Okay, that's it. Let's get back to the book. Something happened the other day where I rushed out the door and I lost something. So this is projection, actually. Yeah. Jensen and Weiner pled guilty to reduced charges and cooperated with the prosecution. They gave 5 years each. Eric McDavid was sentenced to 20 years. Anna was paid $65,000. Okay, great. Among the many clues that McDavid missed. Number 1, money issues. Anna seemed to have paid for nearly everything. Food, the car, gas, tents, plane tickets, the cabin where they were arrested. Over the 2-year period, January 2004 to January 2006, Anna's expenses totaled $35,000. Number 2, vague or inconsequential explanations. Lauren Weiner, quote, Anna always had, she had a lot of $100 bills, end quote, question, quote, and she said purportedly that came from stripping, right? Weiner, yes, well, she also said that she had money from working in a chemistry lab over the semester while she was at school, that she had all these jobs. She was very vague about it. You know, we have to, because of that statement, it just made me realize we have to read another zine, Security Culture, on here. And just a quick hint, look, if you're doing work with people, you gotta know them. Like, you gotta know them. And if you don't know them, if you don't know their daily activities, if you don't know how they operate in the world without doing movement shit, you're gonna get busted. Because you gotta know them. That's how you build security culture. We'll talk about it. Number 3, asking about previous arsons and future illegal actions. Anna testified, quote, I asked him if he had any involvement with the actions and arson that Ryan Lewis took over Christmas, and he denied it. I further asked him, I said, I know a little bit about you. I think you might have been involved. It seems like something you'd be interested in. He says, no, I didn't do that. I have my own plans. I asked him what his plans were, and that was when he stated that Ryan Lewis had made the mistake of doing the actions too close to home, and that McDavid's actions would take place nationwide. And then I again asked him, well, what are you planning? And he said that he had gotten a bomb recipe for C4 from an individual in West Virginia, and his plan was to make little C4 bombs. End quote. Number 4, documenting incriminating evidence. Anna was insistent that the group kept a notebook and write down all their plans. Quote, Anna introduces something that we'll come to know as the burn book. The burn book, she says, is something that the group can use to record their thoughts, their to-do lists, if they need to go buy chemicals, they can write a list of all the chemicals down there. Why call it a burn book? Because a couple of the members of the conspiracy, specifically Lauren Weiner and Zachary Jensen, kind of brittled at the fact that we're writing all this stuff down. We don't want to commit any of this to writing. Anna solves that problem. She says, that's simple. We'll burn it at the end. After we're done, we're going to burn this book. End quote. That's the prosecutor's description, and the burn book became important evidence in the trial.
No shit. I mean, that everything we've read up to this point, that is the biggest red flag. I would walk away immediately if someone was like, we have to write all this stuff down. What are you talking about?
Look, when I do mutual aid, I write shit down. Like, there's inventory. If I got masks to hand out, if I got COVID tests, plan B, if I any Narcans, whatever we got. That stuff, look, we're just distributing that shit, okay? What the fuck? Number 5. failure to follow agreed upon security protocols. Wiener, quote, well, it was stated by Eric back in November that absolutely nothing would be written down, and we all agreed to that. And then all of a sudden, everything was being written down, and that was obviously very uncomforting to me. Also, Anna testified, quote, that night there was a discussion and Jensen specifically mentioned that he was very uncomfortable with the fact that I still had my cell phone, as the rest of the members of the group did not carry cell phones and had no desire to carry cell phones, and felt that cell phones were a method for law enforcement to track them. So they began to pressure me to get rid of my cell phone, end quote. Anna used her phone to provide the FBI real-time intelligence.
I'm really worried that it's going to be used for exactly what you're using it for right now.
That's funny. I mean, like, look, I'm sorry, that really
It's
sucks.
terrible, but I mean, like,
that these people
the
had to go.
irony is humorous.
Yes. 6. Pressure towards illegal action. Wiener, quote, she was upset that there were no plans, and I was upset because I felt like I didn't know where these plans were coming from. 7. Discomfort of other teammates. Quote, question, do you remember the conversations in that car ride? Were any of them about a feeling you had that she was leading you and the rest of the group into a trap? Zachary Jensen, I do remember having a conversation about that. Question, okay, and it was where you said something to the effect of, you know, I have this feeling that you, Anna, you're leading us into a trap, right? Jensen. Yes. Number 8. Discrepancies between stated intention and actual activity. Earlier, at a 2005 protest against the Organization of American States, Anna presented herself as a medic, but she had no training and never actually served in that function. Instead, she claimed specialized skills as a means to gain access to planning meetings and collect information. According to Del Papa, one of the protest organizers, quote, Anna didn't seem very interested in offering medical care and comfort to protesters. She was more curious about the protest organizers. She started asking all of these really specific questions about who was coming and how many people were coming. She got really aggressive about wanting detailed information about our plans, end quote. At the demonstration itself, Anna then used her position to push tactics that were not only illegal, but contrary to existing plans and probably counterproductive. Quote, during the march, Del Papa said Anna started recruiting high school students to stage a sit-in to block traffic right in front of a large group of Broward County Sheriff officers in riot gear. Del Papa was sure the provocation would lead to arrests and to the police clearing protesters from the area. 9. Discovering the bug. Anna testified on the drive down into Auburn there was a wire had fallen out of the dash of the car, and as McDavid was fiddling with the wire, the recording device in the car fell out of the dash into his hand. I took the recorder out of his hand, I shoved it back into the dashboard, and I said, stupid old car, just a piece of shit. He let it go. He didn't question me further about it, but he acted strange, as if there was something somewhere in his subconscious. He knew that was a weird occurrence, but he never pressed me about it. He had basically just found me out, but didn't quite know it, end quote. Whoa. What's remarkable about this case is that McDavid and the others failed to challenge Anna on these behaviors despite their collective obsession with quote-unquote security culture. The terms showed up again and again in the trial as an explanation of why they did certain things the way they did. They got new email accounts, they communicated in code, they used fake names, they went without cell phones, except for Anna, and on and on. But they did not apparently think carefully enough about who they wanted to work with and what they wanted to do. Plans are important. They clearly underestimated the level of technical skill their plan required, but more importantly, it seems they underestimated the level of risk involved, and therefore also the level of commitment and trust necessary. All four conspirators were working far outside the scope of their experience, and they don't seem to have seriously considered the basis on which they were working together. Anna, for instance, seemed to have been invited in because McDavid had a crush on her. In this sense, the conspiracy failed twice. It failed first because the group lacked a sound basis for working together, couldn't agree on a coherent plan, didn't have the necessary technical proficiency to succeed, and finally, much to Anna's frustration, were too flaky to follow through on their ideas. It was a group of people that should not have been working together. It failed, again, because one of the four was an agent provocateur, and two later turned state's evidence. It's worth noting, though, that both sets of failures occurred for many of the same reasons. Oh, this is the dude that we covered in Why Misogynists Make Great Informants.
Profile 3, Brandon Darby. Similarly, David McKay and Bradley Crowder got in over their heads with activist turned informant Brandon Darby. Brandon Darby was a prominent organizer, originally in Austin. He went to New Orleans during the Hurricane Katrina disaster and became a leader of Common Ground, a grassroots relief agency that provided free food, medical aid, legal assistance, and home repair, while also fighting home demolitions and police brutality. In August 2008, Darby traveled with the, quote, Austin Affinity Group, unquote, including McKay and Crowder, to St. Paul to protest against the Republican National Convention. When they arrived, police searched their van and seized homemade riot shields. Darby urged the group to escalate its tactics in response, quote, "We're not going to take this lying down. We've got to do something about it," unquote, quoted in Zincota, cited below. That evening, McKay and Crowder made some Molotov cocktails and stashed them in the basement of the house that they were staying.
I just gotta say, look, if the police take your shit, things are replaceable. Do not go after them. Okay? Nothing is more valuable than your life and your comrade's life. Remember that, dude. If they take your riot shields, dude, figure something else out. Do not hold a grudge. That is just exactly what is going to happen regardless. If you lose your shit, if you lose your banner, if you lose your trans flag, dude, let it go. It's replaceable.
Mm-hmm. Very true. According to McKay,
one more thing. Sorry, one more additive. Don't bring anything that you're not willing to lose.
According to McKay, when they mentioned the Molotovs to their affinity group, they were told in no uncertain terms, quote, "What you are doing is ridiculous, stupid, and dangerous," unquote. At that point, they basically gave up on the idea of using firebombs and went to the demonstration without them. Later, though, Darby asked McKay what they planned to do with the bombs. Quote, "David said he didn't want to lose face with Brandon, so he made up a plan," unquote, about attacking a parking lot full of police cars. Darby simultaneously told McKay he didn't think he and Crowder were ready for that sort of action and goaded him towards it and offered to help. I'm sorry. Let me do that one more time. Darby simultaneously told McKay he didn't think he and Crowder were ready for that sort of action and goaded him towards it and offered to help. They agreed to meet at 2 a.m., but McKay blew it off and stopped responding to Darby's messages. McKay was arrested in bed at 4:30 a.m. We now know that Darby had been giving the FBI information since at least February 2007 and had actually been on the payroll since November that same year. It's not clear exactly when the collaboration began, and many people now cite suspicions about Darby from much earlier. Darby's own story is that he first approached the FBI after a Palestinian activist asked him to help raise money for Hamas and Hezbollah. The experience led him to reflect on his own views about militancy, after which he called the FBI and volunteered to work as an informer. In 2008, the FBI put him to work as part of their campaign against the anti-RNC protests. In that capacity, he attended planning meetings and regularly wore a wire. It was during this period that Darby met McKay and Crowder. The two young activists looked up to Darby and sought to emulate his militancy, while he relentlessly razzed them for being quote unquote tofu eaters and quote unquote weaklings, a dynamic that led them to feel that they had something to prove. McKay says, quote, "We really didn't feel very comfortable about Brandon for a long time, but it always came into play that we had never done anything like this ever, and that's everything that Brandon was. With him, we felt like we were legitimate." Quote end quote. Of course, it was Darby who told the FBI about the riot shields and later the Molotov cocktails. The first attempt at a trial ended in a hung jury. Interesting. The result of McKay's entrapment defense. Ultimately, however, both McKay and Crowder pled guilty to firearm charges. Crowder got 2 years, McKay got 4. Darby was paid $12,750 plus $3,028 for expenses. In this case, too, there were numerous clues that Darby was not to be trusted. 1. Previous behavior. The Austin Chronicle wrote, quote, "As around Austin activist circles, several local activists described Darby as a troubled, paranoid man with a volatile history with women, a penchant for violent rhetoric, and a strong authoritarian streak," unquote. Similarly, at Common Ground, Malik Rahim recalls, quote, "At the very beginning, he was helpful, but after a point, he became harmful. He did everything he could to destroy St. Mary's, which was where we were housing the majority of our volunteers, by letting a bunch of crackheads move in there. And he also drove a wedge between me and Lisa Fithian and eventually caused her to leave too. He was doing everything you're supposed to do as a government agent in this situation, divide and conquer," unquote. 2. Demanding access to sensitive information he didn't need. Fithian says that during the RNC, Darby had to be asked to leave meetings where the details of actions were being worked out. Quote, "He said he was there to do medical, but instead he was at all the meetings," unquote. She recalls, quote, "I actually asked, in quote, what the fuck is he doing here?" Quote. "I told him he needed to leave," end quote. 3. Assumptions of authority. Scott Crow, one of the founders of Common Ground, told This American Life, quote, he doesn't ask. A lot of time he just assumes that nobody knew what they were doing and he was going to do it, even though he never organized anything, never organized anything. Zero." End quote. 4. Exaggerating his own knowledge and experience. Crow also told the Chronicle, quote, "He inserted himself as, in quote, unquote, co-founder. He wanted that status, even as people were getting written out of the Common Ground history, people who did a lot of work organizing," end quote. 5. Taking credit for others' work. Crow, again, quote, "If you look at the way Brandon tells it, he did the whole lower Ninth Ward with one hand tied behind his back, when really there were lots of people who did the work and the organizing too, who you'll never hear about because of Brandon's monopoly on the media," end quote. He explains, quote, "Darby made sure that the media followed him extensively and didn't interview other people. So did he do that just because he's crazy, or did he do that to get more credibility for himself so that he could gather more information?" End quote. 6. The hero complex. Lisa Fithian summed up Darby's attitude. Quote, "It's all about him and his need to be the savior." Unquote. 7. bravado. Darby announced regarding his plans to disrupt the RNC, quote, any group I go with will be successful, unquote. 8. Paranoia and tendency towards violence. Scott Crow, quote, I'm not a psychologist, but I would definitely say that guy's paranoid. I mean, he sleeps with guns under his pillow. This is not something I've been told. This is something I've seen. The guy has a cache of weapons. 9. Machismo, Fithian, quote, he did a lot of Wild West shit. Mr. Macho action hero, end quote. 10. Misogyny. The Chronicle reports, quote, other sources spoke of a particular romantic relationship in Darby's past that they describe as emotionally abusive and Darby as paranoid, jealous, and possessive, unquote. Fithian says his behavior was poisonous to the culture at Common Ground. Quote, he was a leader of the organization, and because of that, he was able to set some patterns in motion that I believe led to systemic issues of sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and violence, unquote. Also, check out the Stop Disinfo, right? That was the one? Yes. For more on his level of... No, why misogynists make good informants.
Yeah, that one.
That goes into more detail about his misogyny. 11. Bullying. McKay, quote, we had a lot of discussions where he was criticizing us about where we were physically. He put Crowder in a chokehold out of nowhere just to test what Brad would do, end quote. 12. Concerns raised by others. People who knew Darby described him with words like, quote-unquote, megalomania, manipulative, very brash, very macho, very confrontational, violent at times, crazy, a wingnut, hero complex, and, quote-unquote, pathological liar. Fithian adds, quote, I always said at Common Ground, if he was not a cop or an agent of the state, he was doing their job for them, creating division and disrupting our work, unquote.
Called it.
Yep. 13. McKay and Crowder also should have paid attention to their own reservations. McKay remembers saying to Crowder, quote, I hope this isn't one of those, in quote, when keeping it real goes wrong, out quote, scenarios.
Commonalities. There's a broad pattern common to all these cases. People passing themselves as tough, militant, super radical big shots, manipulated, bullied, or guilt-tripped less experienced, more pliable people, and pushed them towards actions far beyond anything they were prepared for, tactically and politically. In the Darby case, this dynamic advanced through the medium of masculinity. Darby's presentation of himself centered on an image of a tough, decisive, bold, heroic, quote-unquote, man of action, and he prodded his younger, more impressionable comrades largely by challenging their masculinity. McKay and Crowder then made some dumb decisions, not simply because they trusted the wrong person, but because Darby's influence helped them to wrongly conflate radicalism, militancy, and personal commitment with an exaggerated masculinity and the psychological need to be tough guys. This is what this is what misogyny does to men. Look, we're toxic in all the ways, but there is no toxic masculinity here. Look, I beat it out of Kesray a while ago, okay? Like, just straight on, just hammered him. Just kidding, that never happened. But regardless, it's nice here. I realize that these cases may not count as quote-unquote entrapment in the narrow legal sense, but they certainly fit the common sense meaning of the word. The government manufacturing a crime for the sake of luring unsuspecting people into a conviction. In none of these cases would the plot have existed, much less been enacted, without the intervention of the provocateur. I've chosen 3 cases involving the anarchist or radical environmentalist movements. But a similar pattern has emerged in FBI quote-unquote terror cases targeting Muslims. In 2009, the Islamic Center of Irvine discovered that the FBI had hired Craig Montilan using the name Farouk Aziz to infiltrate numerous mosques in the LA area. His activity led to one arrest. Ahmadullah Niazi was charged with lying on his immigration application to hide the fact that his brother-in-law was Osama bin Laden's bodyguard. In this case, too, there had been plenty of reasons to worry. 2 years earlier, the Council of American Islamic Relations was so shocked by Montiel's big talk about jihad that they reported him to the police and filed a restraining order against him. Likewise, the 2006 plot to bomb the Sears Tower was a creature of two FBI provocateurs active in Miami's poor Black Liberty City neighborhood. That case went to trial 3 times before producing convictions. As Thomas Sincada wrote in The Public Eye, quote, previous juries viewed the FBI informant posing as a member of Al-Qaeda as the driving force behind the plot. Despite paying informants over $130,000, the FBI produced no evidence of explosives, weapons, or blueprints, only a videotape of defendants pledging an oath to Al-Qaeda, a quote-unquote oath to Al-Qaeda, recorded in a warehouse wired by the FBI. Also in 2006, the government took note of a group of Albanians who had videotaped themselves riding horses, shooting guns, and shouting quote-unquote Allah Akbar. The FBI sent 2 untrained informants to befriend the group. One of the informants, Mahmoud Omar, quickly assumed a position of leadership and offered to get them weapons. When they finally agreed, they were arrested. More recently, in late 2010, the FBI arrested a Somali-born teenager for trying to bomb a Christmas tree lighting ceremony in Portland, Oregon. The young man, Mohammed Osman Mahamud, had tried to get in touch with jihadists online, but the FBI responded instead. Over several months, federal agents helped Mohamud concoct his plot, providing technical advice and financial assistance, and supplying both the fake bomb and the vehicle used to transport it. As Stephen Wax, Mohamud's attorney, explained, quote, the government provided the money, the government provided the transportation, and the government was involved in the meetings, end quote.
The standard profile. In all these cases, the provocateurs shared some common traits which, one would hope, we might have learned to recognize by now. Way back in 1983, the Anti-Repression Resource Team and Midwest Research Group studied the available information on dozens of infiltrations and entrapment cases and created a standard profile of the provocateur. Quote, extraordinary agents provocateurs are individuals who are agents of the state, although not usually regular employees, who make a living out of destroying ongoing movement organizations by disruption and factionalizing a group to an extraordinary degree. These individuals are extraordinarily action people, ready to deal with guns and armed struggle, ready to participate in direct action in all its forms and to be arrested. One of the telltale signs of an extraordinary agent provocateur is the advocacy and use of excessive violence. Quite often, extraordinary agent provocateurs gain their initial respect by procuring guns for a group. Others constantly urge the group on to violent confrontations or armed actions which will be counterproductive. Extraordinary agent provocateurs are usually very close to one or more top leaders and make sure that they will get along with them, but they are generally very difficult for others to get along with. Their usual social behavior is bad to atrocious, except when leadership is around. Unquote. In addition to these characteristics and those mentioned earlier in the case studies, we might also note that in most of these cases, the militancy is accompanied by vague or inconsistent politics. Quote, very often their political lines change abruptly without apparent reason or explanation. Along with the political disruptiveness is a basic lack of solid political growth. When long experience with a particular issue does not lead to qualitatively better political understanding of the issue, there are grounds for security suspicions. Extraordinary agent provocateurs are usually action-oriented and press ahead with more daring and more illegal activities without any increase in their political understanding of an issue. Informers often push their interest far beyond their political capacity. Quite often, informers are at events that they cannot understand or explain politically, unquote. I think it's I'll read another one. Proceed with caution, and you can read the conclusion. Here's a word of caution. Here a word of caution is in order. It is totally conceivable, maybe even likely, that a person could fit this sort of pattern and not be a government agent. There's a whole range of other possible explanations. He could be employed by a private agency. He could be sabotaging movement work for personal or ideological reasons. He could be well-meaning but misguided, mentally ill, or merely very foolish. There is also the possibility that the state is not employing him, but has made a calculated decision to leave him alone while his behavior wreaks havoc in the movement. Or the cops might be biding their time monitoring him while they build as big a case as they can. Usually, all we have to judge by is the actor's behavior. And so we just don't know what the full story is. It is important, therefore, not to jump to conclusions, and especially not to jump to conclusions publicly. There is entirely too much mudslinging, rumor mongering, and trial by flame war in the anarchist movement already. We can't afford to make it worse with premature denunciations or allegations we can't substantiate.
Stop disinfo in its tracks.
For one thing, it is a favorite trick of police agencies to make false allegations and spread such rumors themselves in order to neutralize leaders, sow suspicion, and generate rifts in the movement. Quote unquote, snitch jacketing, they call it. For another reason, there is a real danger that by overstating the conclusion, one can inadvertently overshadow the real concerns that exist. If the allegation is, quote, this guy's a Fed, unquote, then the question becomes, quote, is he a Fed, unquote? If the evidence doesn't conclusively show that he is, the whole affair may be written off as false, even if there are genuine reasons to worry. The answer then is to concentrate on the demonstrable evidence rather than peddling conjecture. In practical terms, that means addressing the person's problematic behavior rather than leveling accusations about their intent. The point that really deserves attention is that whether or not people matching this description are provocateurs, their provocateurs-like behavior ought to be enough to discredit them. Yeah, and it kind of just reiterated some of the stop disinfo in its tracks.
Yeah.
Tied into that well.
Conclusion. The people entrapped in these recent cases got into trouble partly by trusting the wrong people, but also by needing too much to impress them, trying too hard to please them. Quote, I was always trying to impress her, Lauren Weiner testified. But most of all, I think the victims here failed to trust their own better judgment. The conclusions ought to be commonsensical. Know the people you do political work with. The more risky the work, the better you need to know them. Be more realistic about your skills, experience, understanding, and limitations, and those of the people you work with. Use your own judgment in deciding what sort of work to pursue, what tactics to adopt, and the level of risk to accept. Don't let yourself be bullied, guilt-tripped, or baited into anything that seems like seems to you like a bad idea. And don't shrug it off when something goes wrong. Of course, that still may not be enough to keep you out of jail, but it seems to me like the least we can ask of people we work with, whether we're doing anything illegal or not. All right, so like let's get to discussion. How'd you like the book?
I thought it was really interesting. One of the things that I thought was interesting is two of them, because there were three, used being a medic as a way to get in meetings.
Right? I know. You know why? Everyone needs a medic.
Yeah.
Gotta have your medic. So, you disguise as one of those and, well... Oh shit, don't listen to me, FBI, just don't.
No, I thought it was interesting reading about Brandon Darby on a different article. And, I don't know, hearing how they frame it a little differently.
Yeah.
And getting a little bit more of the story, too.
Yeah, I like that too. I liked all the ways that after each profile, they had a bullet point list, or a numbered list. They described all the different ways, that each provocateur had sabotaged and provided counterinsurgency.
I mean, the second one, what was her name? Anna. It just seems like she literally did everything, and then they just blamed the other people that she said she was associated with. Almost like it seemed like none of them wanted to do anything, and she's like, no, they're part of my group. So, like,
what? Yeah, she wouldn't get paid. If she didn't entrap people, she couldn't get paid. So it was a job to her. It was a fucking job, like, yeah, she did all the work. She found the people to entrap.
I mean, the money, the vehicle, she brought plant. Like, hearing everything, it's like, so you got arrested at some point, right? Because it seems like you wanted to bomb some shit really bad. It's just...
Yeah.
But I mean, keep notes? Keep notes? I don't know.
Well, okay, look, hear me out. I think that, yes, keeping notes about the details that they provided, horrible. No. You don't keep those type of notes. I mean, like, I think it is good to have some notes, maybe to yourself, and again, if you... like these people had been saying, if they really have as tight of a security culture as they thought they had, then they would have,
Right.
they would have questioned more. Like when a wire drops out of someone's car into your fucking hand. You got such tight security culture. What the fuck? Why are you not questioning that? What is this? And then they give some like off-brandish answer, and you're just like, no, let's keep interrogating here. Yeah.
No, yeah. I mean, in hindsight and from the outside, seems like,
well,
obvious.
Their unfortunate mistakes are our learning experiences, so.
Yeah. True.
But I did really like how they even inserted security culture in there, right? Like security, like that's like anarchism 101. I mean, like all this stuff kind of is, because you got it. This is all the base stuff so far.
And how like it kept coming up in trial and all these different things that they were doing. Their collective obsession with security culture, and yet it seemed like that the interpersonal security culture. I don't know how to word it, but like they just didn't quite.
Well, so like in the zine security culture, they have 5 levels, right? And it's even said, like, the riskier the business, the more you got to know your comrade.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like in security culture in Zine, there's five steps, right? Like five steps of security, like 5 layers. And if you're doing something like what Brandon Darby wanted to do, number 5, highest security. You need to know that motherfucker inside and out. You cannot, like, you have to trust your comrades. And the only way to do it is to know them. You can't just say, well, they do good work, like Brandon Darby and Why Misogynists Make Great Informants, because that's dismissing and minimizing any negative activity that goes on. And if they're being misogynist, especially as leaders, well, then they're what? They're ruining the group, the AG, the organization, whatever the fuck it is. And then they provide, and then they spread toxic masculinity in there, which then got disseminated, and it pressured the men into doing stupid shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's why it's toxic masculinity. It's one of the few toxic things that we do not want here.
I missed that last sentence.
I said toxic masculinity. That's one of the few toxic things we don't want here.